So we're going to play a bunch of Intellivision games for a while, and we're playing these off the recent Intellivision Sprint console, which I actually got some mileage out of as far as video fodder is concerned. If nothing else, there's a couple of games on here I couldn't have played otherwise, so please disregard the years-old shots of cartridges being inserted into a now non-functional Intellivision 2 console that I eventually got replaced and now sees limited use for obvious reasons. Well, anyways. Shark Shark, released in 1982 for Intellivision, and some would argue one of the best games to grace the system. Well, I argued that if you had a cornhole game on Intellivision, Shark Shark would not even be in the discussion, but I guess they're saving that for the new AmicoVision that's coming out, right? Right? Okay, in all seriousness, the premise of Shark Shark's relatively simple enough. You play a little tiny fish in a relatively large pond who eats smaller fish for points while avoiding larger fish for survival, as well as the eponymous shark that roams around the sea every so often. Now, for every 1,000 points scored, you'll grow in size, which allows you to eat slightly bigger fish, and if you keep at it, you'll eventually become a very big fish that can eat almost anything, but not everything. However, the catch is that the bigger you become, the slower you move around, and thus the less maneuverable you end up being, and that's where it becomes more of a challenge to avoid the dangers around you. And if you happen to get consumed, you'll lose a life and respawn back to a little bitty fish, meaning you'll have to make your way back up the food chain all over again. Again, it's a fairly simple premise, but Shark Shark does take what little it has to produce a fairly engaging title that, as with most engaging or compelling titles on Intellivision, is somewhat hampered with spotty controls. Now, to be fair, moving your fish around isn't that much of a hassle. The disc works fine here, and the game does take the multi-directional aspect into account, so you're not restricted to the cardinal directions and such. That's fine. But then there's the dashing mechanic, which can be executed at the press of a button, any button it would seem, but only if you're not holding a direction, meaning you'll have to let go of the disc and then press the dash button to execute said dash, which is kind of But honestly, it's the only real quibble I have with Shark Shark, along with the usual stiffness of the controls that, again, is more due to the controller than any software programming. Once you get past that hurdle and you start developing a rhythm of sorts and know your place in the Atlantis food chain of sorts, Shark Shark can be quite the pleasurable experience. I also get a kick out of the fishies being eaten by other fishies as if this was how life is in this neck of the ocean. Or is a lake probably a pond or a fish tank? Who could say for sure? The answer is, of course, who cares? 3 different speed settings, and there's also 2-player gameplay where you could eat each other, and that's always fun. Visually, Shark Shark looks pretty good by Intellivision standards at least. The sea life is fairly simplistic looking with its single solid colors and somewhat indecipherable fishies, but at the very least the titular shark looks like a shark in the vaguest sense. As for sound effects, they're pleasant enough, with audio cues playing whenever a shark or other strange creature comes into play. No music to be found other than a game over jingle, but that's okay. This is one of those games that doesn't really need music anyway, and I also find in the case of Intellivision, the less music you play, the better off you are. Overall, if you wanted a killer app for your Intellivision master component system back in the day, or maybe even today for that matter, you could do worse than Shark Shark. Controls tolerably despite some hiccups, the premise is straightforward, and if you want to lose some friends, invite one of them over for 2-player games where you could eat each other alive. The wonderful joys of life, and unquestionably one of the highlights of the Intellivision library. So of course there's a remake decades later. Thanks, but no thanks. I'll stick with the original.